get started. We have a lot of information to get through today, but welcome to our session on working within a group. So my name is Emily. I'll introduce myself first. I'm a virtual tutor in the online ILC, Writing and Study Skills Center. So I've worked with Wake Tech for, I don't know, maybe about 7 or 8 years or so, working in the Writing Center. I previously worked at South Campus, but since the pandemic, a lot of us have been working online, which has been great. And I will turn it over to my coworker, Phil, to introduce himself.
My name's Phil Urshadi. My situation's a lot like Emily's in that I've been working at Wake Tech for basically ever, except for that I work in the math center. I deal with the numbers. That's the long and short of it. I'm basically a math nerd and I have no idea how to stop it. So please accept my apologies. So a little bit about our background. Emily's got more of a background in sociology, psychology, and group work. And I'm coming at this from a completely different perspective because I don't have a lot of educational background in groups, but I am fairly good at breaking up larger processes into smaller processes through my math background. So with our powers combined, maybe we can fill in some of the blanks that you might have in working in groups.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what we're going to do today, thank you for that introduction, Phil. We're going to talk first about, if you actually go to the next slide with some of our little outline here. We're going to start off by getting into the research of things when it comes to working in a group. So I'm going to cover a lot of the benefits or advantages of working in a group. Then we'll talk about some of the necessary factors for effective group work, and then also the challenges that are bound to come up when you're working with others in a group. And then I'll transition things over to Phil, who will talk more about how do we actually put this stuff into practice. So let's get into it. And there will be moments here in the chat as well where we'll ask you to get involved. Otherwise, go ahead and keep yourselves muted just so we can move along quickly through this workshop. But here's actually our first opportunity for you to get involved in the chat if you'd like. Go ahead and let us know, what do you think are some of the benefits of working in a group? So like I said, there are certainly its challenges and tough moments of working in a group, but what can you think of just off the top of your head of some of the benefits or advantages of working in a group? And we'll do our best to kind of keep an eye on the chat here and give you a couple moments here to think about this before we go on to what the research tells us.
Yeah, I'll pop that open. Learning from each other. Absolutely right.
Absolutely.
I like that one.
Yep, that is inevitable. Yes, when you're working with the group and hearing others' ideas and perspectives, for sure.
Yeah. I always said, I think I said last time, none of us know everything, and we all have to be honest about that.
Yes.
As they say, not only was Rome not built in a day, it certainly wasn't built by one person.
Right.
See, better thought through ideas. Yeah. Same general concept, definitely. Got lots of good ideas coming, looks like.
Yeah, and like I previously mentioned, I'll give you some time here to contribute in the chat a little bit more. But with looking at the benefits, the disadvantages or challenges, and then also those necessary factors, Phil and I did a lot of research here in terms of, what this whole concept of working in a group means. So what's nice is the next coming slides are all based in current research on how to effectively work in groups, what are the benefits, what are the challenges, things like that.
See, Janine says dividing the workload. Anna says increased productivity. Absolutely. Diverse perspectives. That's something. Yeah, that's definitely a big one. Support and motivation and creative problems. Yeah, I think. Dang, she's covered the list right there. Right on. I like it.
I'm looking at that list like those are everything that we're actually going to talk about.
That's like almost exactly what's on the next slide.
It is exactly. Yeah, Anna's leading us perfectly into it. Yeah, let's but again, thank you for everyone contributing. Yeah. Really good stuff in the chat there. But yes, productivity, diverse perspectives, those are all things that we're going to be discussing for sure. So yeah, let's get into it. So in terms of the benefits, what the research tells us is that working in groups builds on the skills of each member to achieve common goals. So like Phil kind of mentioned, we can typically accomplish more than individually individual members working solo. There's also been noticeable gains in productivity, like Anna also mentioned here, in the workplace. It can improve employee and or corporate knowledge. Working in groups also enhances quality of life among employees, professionally speaking. And they can also lead to strategic advantages over competition.
Yeah. I want to talk a little about the quality of life as a short aside here. Almost all of us have the need for recognition. Even if we don't always realize it, we want the people around us to recognize us for who we are and be seen and be heard and be understood and be valued. And when you work in a group, if you're with a good group of people, you can get all of that from your coworkers. And in fact, I read recently in my research for this is that when people retire, most of them don't miss the work, but a lot of them do miss the people.
Absolutely.
And, I hasten to add my coworkers here at Wake Tech, almost all of them have been very talented and excellent at what they do, specifically here in the VT section.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yes, love that. Excellent. So before we get into now our
There we
next
go.
section, after the benefits, which you all did a great job of identifying already. Now what I'd like to think for you to think about in the chat is what do you think are some of the necessary factors for effective group work? So in order to really reap those benefits and to see those benefits come to life, what do we need? What do we need for a group to be successful?
And what separates a group that's unsuccessful from a group that's successful?
Yes, absolutely.
Humility. Oh, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I'll
Yeah,
tell
being
you
able to
what.
kind of recognize where maybe, your ideas, if you, recognizing where maybe somebody else's ideas are potentially better or more,
More
better for the
complete,
group, right?
or at the very least, recognize that other people will have ideas you didn't think of.
Sure.
Feel safe to share ideas and perspectives. Oh,
Yep.
yeah. Huge. That's huge. I'm going to talk about that myself and how to address that if some people feel unsafe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Kind of also tied to, respect and giving people, that opportunity to share, for sure.
And being willing to change your mind.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Give you a couple more moments here to think of some other ideas in terms of what are the necessary factors for group work to be
Yeah.
successful.
Effective communication. That one keeps coming up, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. So we actually have a whole slide devoted to communication. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So, but communication is also a two-way street. It's hard work. Well, yeah, for sure.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I think I'm going to be talking about this in terms of engagement versus disengagement as well.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, let's get into it. So again, great job in the chat. Already identifying a lot of things that we're going to be discussing. So first, one of the main necessary factors for effective group work is identification of compatible group members. So essentially finding people that you work well with and ideally, if possible, continuing to work with them on projects. Finding people with similar values and traits or things that you have in common. On the flip side, though, it also, and I know Phil wants to add in here as
Hmm.
well, in terms of diversity, it's good still to, even though you want to find people that you work well with, to also have, a diverse group of perspectives and backgrounds to really help fuel the creative process.
You need a group of people who is willing to listen and willing to speak as well. It's like you have to have a little bit of both to really be an effective group member. And I'll talk more
Absolutely.
about that in a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. It's also important to establish clear expectations for timelines, for organizational purposes. You could even potentially, if it works for your group, have some type of signing agreement or establishing, some type of rules or laws in your group. And here are some kind of guiding questions that can help with establishing those expectations. So, asking your group members who exactly will complete certain tasks. When and how will members meet and communicate during the project term? What are the group expectations for communication with each other? How and when will members submit their part of the assignment to the group? Who will be responsible for editing the final document? And finally, who will submit the final group assignment for the group?
Yeah. All good questions, and it's very important to be specific when answering these. There's a temptation to answer questions of this nature hastily and without addressing all of the possible vague areas, but I would say address that vague stuff sooner rather than later. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, if you ask when and how will people meet and communicate, have definite times and have definite methods, and say which members need to communicate at what times and in what scenarios.
Absolutely. Yes. Very, very important to be specific for sure. All right. So again, I think it was Anna who mentioned in the chat communication. That's a huge one that we need for group success. This could look like a variety of different things. It could be through phone, texting, email, discussion board updates, whatever works best for your group, or it could be a combination of all those. It could also be asynchronous or synchronous. Communication can be limited when tasks are simple and each person knows his or her required roles or responsibilities. And actually, when communication becomes bogged down by information being shared that members already are aware of and accept, they can actually start to not share information. So we got to be, kind of aware and careful of that as well. And research also shows us that relaxed and informal communication has been found to be more effective. And it's important to be always receptive and respectful to others' ideas and information.
Yeah, let me just ask if any of you folks have experienced this. Let's say you have a campus email and the campus IT department spams you every couple of hours with system updates, and then you don't even read your email because you got to sift through the IT spam.
Yes.
Like, like that. Has
Yes.
that ever been a problem for some of you?
Right, right.
Yeah.
But that's so true. And then you're just tempted to not even then respond or share after that because you just get so bogged down.
It's like I don't want to like if 99% of your email is spam, you're going to stop reading your email. So don't do that to your group either.
Right, right. Absolutely. That's a good analogy. Yes.
And also, I'll point out one of the particular challenges Emily and I encountered is that our shifts when we work are completely separate. So if you have a member of your group who's on a different shift than you might have no choice but to do asynchronous communication through a channel like Teams or Slack or some other form of talking to each other when you can't actually have a live meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point.
Now, also, certain people are more verbal processors than nonverbal processors. Some people are really good speakers. Some people are good writers. People who are good speakers might like a synchronous method better, and that may require a bit more organization. And it may even require people to come in outside of their usual hours every so often for a meeting. People who are good writers are going to prefer the asynchronous, and you don't really have to plan around that quite as much. They just have to have access to the internet.
Absolutely. And Anna brought up a good point in the chat that we're going to be getting into more throughout really this presentation. This, what happens when group members are not communicating. So that's definitely something we're going to talk more in just a little bit about accountability and leadership. And then Phil's going to also get into more about, disengagement when that happens in a group. So Anna, I'm really glad that you brought that up. We are certainly going to be talking about that more.
Exactly, because there might be good reasons why someone's disengaged, and you don't want to just assume they're lazy. In
Right.
fact, if someone's on your team, at least try to come in with the assumption that you can help them out.
Absolutely. Yeah, so let's get into that next component that we already mentioned, accountability. So what can help with this is setting deadlines and also reporting back to the group regarding status of individual tasks. And what this is this allows for monitoring of each member's level of commitment and engagement. What you can also ask in your group is, are members' needs being met by the group? Commitment and sense of obligation can diminish if members feel like their needs are not being met by the group. Similarly, accountability increases when individual performance is evaluated and when accountability is a valued trait in members within the group. We also want to make sure when it comes to accountability that there is a shared sense of, responsibilities, outcomes, and consequences, and when individual and team accountabilities merge. That's key as well when it comes to accountability. And finally, here, our last bullet point, team success is achieved when members are committed to the overall purpose and when they fully comprehend the importance of each role within the group.
Yeah. And I would also add that if you have members that are more experienced than others, the members who are less experienced definitely need to have more accountability and have more regular check-ins than the more experienced people.
Mhm.
Because the people who are experienced in their role are just going to be able to do their thing without too many checks or balances on what they
Mhm.
need to do. Because Emily and I have been putting together presentations for years now, and most of our work we did on our own. But someone who was maybe a first year instructor at Wake Tech, we couldn't expect them to do that. We would
Mhm.
have to have them work, like they might have to work more closely with the supervisor, have definite deadlines for certain tasks, have more definite tasks they have to accomplish, have those tasks like delineated in actionable steps that they can do that they feel like they can accomplish. Basically, having somebody more experienced break a large process down into a smaller process that they can actually work with
Right,
and
right, and
check in with
that is
them. Go ahead.
yeah, go ahead, sorry.
But also check on that person's needs and whether that person's needs are being met. Because maybe they might be feeling a little bit in the dark if they're less experienced and they need some questions answered. And maybe they're not feeling like they could answer that on their own.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and you bring up a good point too that kind of will help lead into our next couple slides, where we're going to talk about leadership. Like you said, if there are certain people in the group who have more experience than others, and or maybe some who need a little bit more guidance and support, that's where the leaders in the group come in as well. And we'll talk in just a second about how to establish who the leaders are and what their role is. In terms of some other necessary factors, there's a lot, obviously, to be successful, right? We have to have a shared purpose. Interpersonal interaction is key, and also a desired outcome. We want to establish a group culture, something that fits with your particular group. That'll obviously be dependent on your group members and what you guys want to establish. There also needs to be motivation. So teams are motivated by the success and the failure of achieving the group's established goals. So setting goals can lead to increased motivation among group members. However, it's important that each team member is recognized to achieve team motivation. Um, Also, members need to share both credit and blame collectively. And there needs to be decision making, effective decision making. So this could be democratic or participative in nature. Phil's going to talk more about this later on as well. But decision making allows for kind of a collective evaluation of alternatives and solutions. And again, it should be collaborative. That's the key here with decision making in groups. And there also needs to be trust. And Phil mentioned this actually in our first offering of this workshop earlier today, that sometimes this needs to be built up, right? It's not, we're not just going to immediately trust our group members right away. We kind of need to build up and work on that sense of trust among the group.
Yeah, and the more we communicate with each other, and the more honestly we communicate with each other, and the more experience we have working together, the more that trust gets built. But again,
Mhm.
Rome doesn't get built in a day.
Right.
I'll also add that deciding on a purpose and the desired outcome is something that you want to agree on sooner rather than later. And not everyone's going to necessarily agree exactly on what that purpose is or necessarily agree on what the desired outcome is. And one of the first things you want to do when the group is formed and you have some sort of problem you want to solve is brainstorm on that first.
Hmm.
And I'll get into how that happens during my part. Same thing with
Absolutely.
the group culture. Like, you want to decide whether you're going to be working over email or over chat or just have a lot of live meetings, and at what point you feel like you might have to re-meet to review any of the things you previously decided in case things go south during the group's work.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yes. Thank you for mentioning that.
Mhm. All right.
All right, so we mentioned this already. Leadership. Let's get into what this would look like in a successful group. So I really like this quote here as I was researching. The leader assigns responsibilities, allocates resources, ingests and disseminates information, and also maintains schedule accountability. So essentially, groups require oversight and management from some type of leader. whether that's a group leader or an instructor. And this person facilitates task accomplishment and communication towards achieving goals. What's key though here, what I really liked is this next bullet point, that leaders should still be seen as members. So they're not necessarily like this king of the castle kind of, this bigger entity over everybody else. Sure, they might have a lot of kind of roles and responsibilities and things like that, but they should still be seen as an equal member of the group. And what can help as well, a good suggestion that I liked when I was researching, is to rotate the role of the leader, which can increase cooperation within the group. So I think that's kind of a good idea as well, if it works with your group. If you have a number of people who have leadership experience, or just a lot of experience working in a group, if you'd like to rotate the role of the leader, I think that's a great suggestion.
And I want to address a certain piece of language that Emily just used. I noticed you said the phrase king of the castle. And I want to talk about diversity and gender roles in regards to leadership, because historically we've looked at leadership as a masculine quality, as in the leadership draws lines in the sand and makes decisions and speaks loud and speaks forcefully. And oftentimes we find in the work environment that those qualities tend to be respected more than other qualities. This is what the research says also, that people who tend to speak more decisively and make decisions are the people who end up being perceived as higher status. And it turns out that doesn't have much to do with your gender, but more to do with your behavior. But I would actually push back against that and say that if you have too many people shouting decisions over each other, you're not going to find the greatest success in a group, because there's plenty of people of either gender or any gender at all that just aren't comfortable taking that role, but their input is still going to be important.
Right.
And I would say in the brainstorming process, which we'll go into later, it's actually super beneficial to have qualities that are traditionally perceived as more feminine, as in openness to possibility, consideration for other people, willingness to receive and willingness to listen, and willingness to build other people up. Trying to have a successful group without those qualities, that group's not going to go anywhere. And to really be an effective group member, it's best to have some qualities that are traditionally masculine and some that are traditionally feminine. Again, nothing to do with your gender itself, but rather the way in which you behave, those are sociological constructs that we just happen to have labeled masculine and feminine. But we all have those qualities in us, and we need to use all of them in order to be effective leaders.
Right. Really interesting point. Yeah, that's something that I had not even thought of. Phil, I really like that. That's very interesting.
Well, thank you. Well, that's why they hired me, right?
Yeah, exactly. Excellent. So after looking at those necessary factors for effective group work, or for a group to be successful, now in the chat, if you'd like to, if you feel comfortable, what do you think are some of the challenges to group work? So Anna already mentioned, okay, if there's a group member who's not communicating, or, again, accountability is typically a big one that we see in terms of difficulties or challenges. But what else can you think of in terms of some of those roadblocks that often come about when we are working in a group? Take a moment here to think about that in the chat.
Yeah. All of you have worked in a group at some point or another, but if you were ever in a disharmonious group, or just a group that wasn't as effective as you would have liked, why do you think that was? If you have too many ideas, just try to pick one or two really good ones. I know it's a target-rich environment. Let's not lie.
Yeah. Phil will be talking more about that brainstorming kind of component of this, where we are kind of generating a lot of ideas and throwing a lot of ideas out there in a group, and how to kind of balance that for sure. Give you a couple more moments here to think about some challenges or difficulties when it comes to group work.
We don't want to run on without you either, though.
Right.
You're part of this presentation too.
That's right.
Can't agree on the same direction or the end result. Yeah. Yeah, that can happen. There are a lot of reasons why that could happen too, which I'll go into.
Absolutely.
One person doesn't pull their weight. Disengagement, certainly true. Some
Yeah,
people may not be heard if it's a large group.
that's an interesting one. Yeah, that can definitely happen.
Hmm. That's anyone who's been in school has had that group member. Just like
Yes.
I was gonna come to the group meeting, man, but like my power just went out, so I can't really go.
Yeah, exactly.
It,
Let's
it,
see. Anna, it just seemed they needed too much support. Everyone else was moving at a different pace. Some members were rude about it. It caused them to shut down.
ooh,
Absolutely.
oh, that's gross.
That is
That's a
gross.
that's a terrible thing to do to your group members.
Right, right. It can certainly happen though. I've been there
It
for sure.
it does happen.
Hmm.
Some people get tossed into roles that they're just not well suited for.
Yes. And that's something you're going to be talking about later for sure.
Uh-huh.
Great. Excellent work again in the chat. Love to see it. So let's get into what the research showed us. And again, a lot of you have already echoed these ideas, but time management is the first one that seems to become an issue. You know, if other people in the group have various life commitments, maybe you're in different time zones, or like Phil mentioned before, you know, us trying to come up with this workshop, but we're working different shifts, you know, things like that can often be an obstacle. Um, Unequal contributions of individual group members. That's something that you all have touched on in the chat as well. Coordination of group work, how to actually, you know, coordinate that and get that done. Communication obviously is a big one, and also procrastination.
Right. Definitely like unequal contributions. We have to keep in mind that maybe that person wants to contribute more but isn't able to or doesn't know how to. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe it could be the person who was elected as leader is not necessarily the best facilitator. Maybe they were
Mm-hmm.
selected as leader based on their decisiveness or masculine traits, but don't necessarily have all of the feminine traits they need.
Sure.
So if they're unable to do that, being a good group member means being willing to step in and
Mm-hmm.
say, well, if the person who was elected to facilitate you isn't the best at doing that, maybe there's something I can do. I mean, I was oftentimes in that role because my training is a bit unusual for a man in that I was largely placed in a facilitator role and I got good at that first.
Mm-hmm.
It actually took me a long time to get good at making decisions and being able to draw lines and saying, I need you to do this, I can take care of this part, and
Right.
said like that delineation, which is traditionally masculine, is not something I was trained in until much later.
Right. Right.
Mm.
And I like what you brought up too about like these assumptions that we have, like assuming like, oh, this person doesn't care. They're not, you know, they're not bought into our group, you know, mission and purpose and things like that. Like you said, maybe there are other things going on. Maybe it's not the right role for them, whatever role they're in the group, or maybe, you know, maybe we need to figure out something else for that person, right? That's a
Exactly.
good point. Yeah.
Exactly. And or as I said earlier, like give them more guidance, give them more actionable steps rather than just giving them vague directives.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially
Absolutely.
for younger workers who are just coming into the workforce, I would say definitely like people in their early 20s, if they've got like their first job and they've never worked in a group before, um they're probably used to school, and in school you have definite steps to everything because all the problems are already solved.
Mhm.
Those are effectively those are closed systems, but the
Mhm.
workforce outside of school is full of open systems.
Right, right. And actually that brings up a really good point that we have on our next slide. If you want to click on over to that, this idea of you know, sometimes a lack of training that people have in group work. So again, you know, additional challenges, lack of clarity in regards to expectations. We talked a little bit about expectations earlier, making sure that those are clear and specific. But again, like Phil just mentioned, you know, maybe some people are not prepared or trained for the increased amount of responsibility that comes with teamwork, or maybe they just don't have a lot of experience in it at all. And that's where, again, you know, the leaders of the group or people who do have that experience really do need to kind of step in and support those teammates who might not have as much training or experience. Potentially, maybe there's also a lack of support for working in teams or companies rewarding individual work over group work. That can certainly happen as well. And then finally, there could just be other conflicts over a variety of things like tasks, personal issues, and processes.
Yeah, definitely like feeling unrecognized for the work that you've done in the group because the louder or more aggressive personalities appear to be seen and heard more than you. That's something that can definitely discourage ordinarily productive group members from doing their best work.
Right. Absolutely. And I wanted to add into just a little bit of research before we finish up with this slide. In terms of this idea of unequal contributions, or feeling like certain people aren't pulling their weight. What the research actually shows us when I was researching is that there is more success in a group when tasks or roles are assigned instead of being volunteered for. So again, figure out your group culture and what works for your group. But that is something that I was reading about, that oftentimes when tasks or roles are assigned instead of just being volunteered for, there can sometimes be more success, and members will increase their effort when other members are failing, which is, again, it's a really interesting concept when we're talking about supporting your teammates who may not have as much experience. Is that, when we can help others who are failing, they're likely to increase their effort for sure.
Yeah. And I think I touched on this earlier that if you're not clear on what you have to do and you are used to solving closed systems and now suddenly you're being forced to solve an open system, that can be really jarring for somebody who's new to their role. So even if you didn't intend to leave the task unclear, the person who's meant to do it might not feel that it's clear, even if you do. So
Absolutely.
definitely they would need help. Also,
Mhm.
let's be realistic that some people are not very clear on what they're good at and not good at, and will just volunteer because they think it's going to get them more recognition.
True, true. Very true.
All right. All right. So this was my section. So this is all about actionable stuff you can do to get the ball rolling in a group situation, because you don't want to be in the conference room and having nobody willing to step up and having everyone just sort of stare at each other when the leader tries to ask them a question to get them started. So someone's got to break the ice and someone's got to get the ideas flowing. So let's talk first principles of brainstorming. Okay. So presumably everyone has some idea of what their purpose there is. And if you don't know what the purpose of you being there is, it's a good idea to brainstorm on that too. Okay. So definitely when you brainstorm, remember that it's okay to have crazy ideas. All right. Because if conventional ideas solved the problem, it already would have been solved. So let people come up with ideas that appear at first glance not to work, because some part of that idea might actually work okay. Most importantly, don't shoot each other's ideas down until after the brainstorming is over. It's more important to have a lot of ideas, even if they're not perfect, because some piece of one person's idea might go together with some pieces of another person's idea. So you're not exactly building Legos here. What you're doing is putting together slices of a jigsaw puzzle and hopefully fitting the whole mess together at the end. When it comes to talking to your group members, definitely always say yes and. So, like, take their idea and see how your idea might build on that, rather than trying to shoot them down by saying, yes, but what about this? That comes later. That comes when it's more like decision time. Brainstorming is a very open, accepting, facilitative process where where rather than trying to strike ideas down or cut them off or winnow them out, we try to get as many as possible and then try to combine rather than cut. Okay. We leave the cut part till the end. Okay. So to help your fellow members along, something you can do is try starting with a short idea session for anyone who's unfamiliar with the process or who just doesn't know the other group members that well. Help them feel safe about sharing their ideas. Like, even if it's not related to work, try just having everybody go around the room, give everybody one chance to share something. But keep your brainstorm sessions to a fairly manageable length, maybe at most half an hour, And then at that point, it's decision time, thinking about which suggestions are going to work best for your particular position. Now, in a brainstorming session, some people are going to be a little bit hesitant. There might be a lot of reasons for that. Some of them may be less experienced or maybe feel like they don't have as much knowledge as the rest of the group, or some people just aren't that verbal. So if that doesn't work for them, try having them write their ideas down first before they share them. Or if they're especially shy, let them hand their written ideas to a leader of the group and let the leader read them out and see what people think about that. And if someone doesn't appear to be contributing at all to a brainstorming session, maybe they have social anxiety. Maybe they care and just don't know how to get the words out of their mouth and get tongue-tied. In that case, might be a good idea to try to talk to them after the session one-on-one to see if they have any thoughts that for one reason or another they didn't feel comfortable sharing. So, after all those suggestions, Emily, have you had any brainstorming sessions in your own group work where you felt like it could have gone better? And what did you do about it when that happened?
Yeah, that's a really good question that you bring up. I've certainly run into this before, especially with your last couple points there about people not necessarily, again, we perceiving it as oh, they're not contributing, they don't care, they're not bought in, but really, like you said, a lot of times it's usually something else that's getting in the way. Maybe they're a little bit shy or nervous, or they feel like their ideas are dumb or something like that, or like you said, maybe they have a different learning preference. Maybe they are better in typing out their thoughts and ideas instead of verbalizing them. So I really do think it a lot of times comes back to this idea of our assumptions about the members in our group, and making sure that we don't necessarily just assume that they don't care or that they're not committed, or that they're not going to pull their weight, but maybe just that they operate a little bit differently, and we need to give them that. I think somebody mentioned earlier in the chat, giving them like a safe space to be able to contribute and share their ideas.
Definitely, definitely, because you don't know what all your group members are coming in with, and you want them to operate at their best.
Right.
I mean, for me, like I tested 100% introvert on the Briggs-Myers test, so just shouting out ideas over more aggressive personalities would not have worked for me, and I
Right.
know that I'm not the only one.
Right. Absolutely.
And I think we have to have room for those sorts of personalities because sometimes the ideas they come up with are things nobody else would consider.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So let's say you've spent half an hour gathering up ideas. It's going to be time to make a decision on which ideas are going to fit your problem the best. Okay. So once you have general ideas, it's time to start filling in the blanks and start being a little bit more decisive. So for the people who have hopefully combined their ideas into one larger idea, it's time to press for specifics about the ideas and see if they can. So like fill in all the vague language at this point. So if there's anything nebulous about the idea, start trying to paint the finer details of that at this time. And if you need to brainstorm about the finer details, that's okay too at this time. And if you don't have an excellent answer for every question, it's okay to say, "Hey, I don't know how this can work. We may have to figure that out later." But and again, it always piggyback your ideas on someone else's. If some part of your idea can work with someone else's idea, that's excellent. And let's see. Now, once you've got maybe half a dozen ideas, you can have people rank which ideas that they think work the best for your problem. And if people are shy about saying this out loud or raising their hands or any of that, you can even do secret ballot where everyone writes their favorites down. Now, hopefully what happens is people have a general agreement on which solutions will work the best for your particular problem, but that doesn't happen all the time. And now, not everyone's going to agree on everything, but we hope that everyone can at least find some partial agreement on the correct solution. But it doesn't happen every time. So we have to think about ruling methods. Now, in most workplaces, people tend to go with majority rule for smaller groups, maybe 5 to 6 people where people take a vote. Problem is, if you end up with a tied vote or an almost tied vote, that can definitely reduce the buy-in for the people who lost the vote. And if they feel like their solution is completely different from everybody else's, they're going to be a little bit reluctant to do their best work on other people's solutions. What you can do about this is if you know somebody who's an expert on that field, they can use their experience to talk about why they might feel one solution is favored over another. But one of the pitfalls of this, you need to make sure this person is a genuine expert. Some people like to say they're experts, but they ain't. So make sure to verify that person's credentials and their track record. Now, if you don't have an expert, at least have a person, somebody like a person that you can trust come in and try to mediate all this. Now, problem with authority is if they might have preferred people that they knew before coming into here. So make sure it's somebody that somebody who everybody in the group is able to trust, and make sure that person isn't being covertly influenced by certain members of the group. Make sure it's an authority everybody can agree deserves to be an authority. Now, if everything goes right, you'll get unanimous agreement. And it may be worth trying to continue the discussion with just the group until you get unanimous agreement. But even under good circumstances, that can take a lot of time. So you need to be sure whether you have enough time to spend on all that. So, Emily, what did your groups in the past do when you had disagreements that were hard to resolve?
Yeah, that's a good question. I really do like all these different types of ruling methods. I can see them working in a variety of scenarios. I think in my experience with working in groups, I think, like you said, consensus rule is obviously, I think, the preferred method. If like you said, if you have the time and space to get there. Otherwise, I actually really do like the idea of bringing in the expert or the authority figure, just because I think it can kind of prevent that scenario of maybe certain members feeling resentful of other members in the group if they didn't get their preferred outcome or things like that. If you can kind of, not to necessarily put blame on somebody else, but if you can bring in an authority figure or an expert on the subject to kind of balance things out and to kind of help make those decisions, I think that can hopefully bring a little bit more peace and understanding to the group, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And in fact, like the expert rule might be an expert on the subject matter, and the authority rule might be an expert on, I guess, more delicate political environments.
Right.
They might know who's going to be affected by this problem and who's going to be affected by the solution, where an expert might
Sure.
know the science or the academic aspects of it.
Sure.
Either one of them could at least explain to the people who maybe got voted against why that solution might be best.
Right. And it can maybe help kind of lead those people towards, understanding and kind of encourage that consensus if they can kind of help explain things, oh, okay, I get it now. I do
Yeah.
see that perspective now.
And even if they don't like it, at least they'll get it and you'll get some form of buy-in.
Right. Exactly.
Now, brainstorming is not always an easy job because you're going to run into problems in your brainstorming. So, what happens in a lot of workplaces is notice cliques tend to form between certain groups of people, and sometimes they tend to decide what they want without consulting anybody else, and they come into the brainstorming session with the notion they're going to just run everybody else over, and they stick their fingers in their ears and don't listen to you. That's definitely a problem. You don't want that to happen to you. Also, I can say when it comes to men in particular, can't necessarily speak for women here, but oftentimes men who are not particularly experienced leaders still feel the pressure to take charge and lead anyway, even if they don't quite know how to handle it. And those people end up diverting the discussion into talk about themselves and their thought process, and they tend to talk a lot more than they speak. Also, Emily, feel free to whack me over the head with a wiffle bat anytime I do this to you. Like,
Will do.
yeah. Don't injure me, just let me know you're disappointed with my actions.
Right, exactly.
Now, you may also have some people who aren't contributing because they just feel inexperienced or lost, or they feel like they don't deserve to be there and they haven't earned it. And they might not be as effective in brainstorming. Also, you have people who are anxious or shy, or maybe just quiet speakers who don't feel seen or heard. Not that I would know anything about that, but all of those obstacles can lead to disengagement. So there are certain ways you can spot disengaged people in the group. The problem with disengagement is it's not something you want to let go on if you could stop it, because you're not using the group's full strength if you're allowing people to be in the group but not engaged with the group. And disengagement is a big problem in today's workforce. According to what I've read, 20% of people going into work are actively not doing their jobs and trying to avoid doing any work. So we're losing 20% efficiency pretty much everywhere we go because people don't feel like they even need to be engaged. And at least another 60% are at least partially disengaged where they're not doing everything that they could. And in that case, you're not using the group's full strength. And this could lead to hasty decisions and lead to suboptimal outcomes for your group. So we want to try to stop that if we spot it. Now, one of the things you might notice about disengaged people is they tend not to say much in the group and seem detached. Having their phones out under the table is a bad sign for sure. People who don't respond to communication and don't seem invested in group decisions, or tend to use radio silence when it comes to asynchronous chat. You can spot that too. Now, of course, the loud, obnoxious, and one might say more masculine personalities may tend to divert the group discussions to go on their ego trips, and some of them might complain about other people trying to take part and shut them down. I think Anna said something about that earlier as well. That's actually, it doesn't look like disengagement, but it actually is. More accurately, it's an engagement with one's own ego rather than with the group or the work that's meant to take place here. Procrastination, Emily mentioned before, if they're not accomplishing their goals while the work is going, we can't assume they're lazy. Maybe there is a reason for their disengagement. So, Emily, are there any other signs of disengagement that you've run into that I haven't listed here?
I mean, not that I can think. I think you pretty much hit it on the head here with these. No, I mean, this is what I pretty commonly see, or what I've seen, I guess, in working with groups. Especially, I would say, the procrastinating, the last point there about not accomplishing their goals or procrastinating. I think that's a huge one that I'm sure we've all run into before. And then I would say also from this list, just like you said, that doesn't say much, kind of feeling detached or just not really bought in, right?
Yeah, definitely. I will admit to being a procrastinator. I will also admit to procrastinating at least to some degree on this particular presentation because of my lack of experience in sociology and
Right.
my own actually I think I have something on the next slide. Imposter syndrome. That's me.
There we go.
Like working like Emily is much more experienced than I am in academic research and in sociology as well, and in working with people. And I felt like sometimes, like, man, who am I to tell her anything? She knows her stuff. I'm new to this. I have to do a lot of reading just to figure out how to break this down. So I was tempted to procrastinate, and I did a little bit. I got there in the end, of course, but it wasn't easy to get myself out of that. So that's one reason they might be disengaged. Maybe they don't feel like they deserve to be there. Other people might not feel like their work is important or being recognized or seen or heard. Some people might be placed in the wrong role. We oftentimes put men into leader roles and women into facilitator roles, but that actually has nothing to do with your biological gender and everything to do with where your head is. And if we make snap judgments on what people's roles are based on biological gender, we might have a case of mismatch and an excellent reason for disengagement. Also, Emily, you might be able to speak to this being overcommitted or burned out.
Yes. Yeah. And I think this has definitely happened to me before. And I was telling Phil that I usually found myself in the type of leader position within the group. I don't know if that was just because I'm a lifelong perfectionist and I wanted to make sure that we, got a good grade and did really well on the group project and things like that. But it would often lead to, me and potentially other members of the group feeling like we may be committed to too many tasks, feeling burnt out, maybe feeling like like we were picking up the slack of other group members. So, you know, this also can be though a reason, like it says here, for disengagement. You know, maybe again, it's not necessarily that a person isn't bought into the purpose or the reason for the group even doing what they're doing, but maybe they're disengaged because they're you know, they've overcommitted themselves to certain tasks in the group and they're just burnt out completely.
Yeah. They may not even have time to do it all.
Right.
They might want to. So, some things you can try in case you have some disengaged members. Number one, they're members of the group, and it's okay to ask them to do stuff. But let them do something that's straightforward, something that you can break into small, actionable chunks, things you can check in with them on and see how it's going, and make sure that you are specific about what they need to do so they don't have anywhere where they can get lost. Something that doesn't need too much independent thought, just enough to keep them engaged. Now, some people are actually in very difficult situations. Actually, in the interest of full disclosure, I've had some situations here at this job where it's been hard for me to even come into work. And I have to give credit to James by being willing to listen to how bad my situation was. He was actually extremely helpful to me. And the fact that he was willing to change his mind about what my capabilities were based on what I had to say was huge. Just having that friendly ear a lot of the times is what kept me going. And now, I think Emily can speak to this next one. Find out how much you can help, but have boundaries. Don't try to do everything.
Absolutely. Yes.
But now, when you come to talk to somebody about their disengagement, it's more important to tell them what they did right. You can do what's called a criticism sandwich, where you tell them what they did right, thank them for listening, but in the middle, have things that you do want to ask them to do as well. And we want to draw a line here between criticism and disrespect, okay? Because criticism says, hey, there are certain things that you could do better if you did X, Y, and Z. Disrespect is you're a bad worker and you're lazy and I can't stand it. You don't want to cross that line into disrespect. Now, you want to have a specific action plan if somebody is disengaged. Make sure they know what they're supposed to do, when they're supposed to do it, have clear expectations, know and make sure that they understand that. But what you don't want to do is call them out publicly and call them lazy in front of everybody. Again, that's disrespect. You don't want to go there. Also, don't assume that you know everything that's going on with them. As we said, there might be excellent reasons for them to be disengaged if they're feeling nervous or they're feeling like they don't have the knowledge, or maybe something else that's not related to work's going on with them. Don't try to make them do everything by themselves. Let them know that you do have their back and you want what's best for the group. It's not personal. It's not about that person. It's about the work that you're doing that's important. It's not about you having an outlet for your disapproval of them or anything they've done. It's about making sure the project works. There is a certain temptation to micromanage them every second of every day. I'm sure you've had a boss that is actually on an ego trip and is actually disengaged themselves and is trying to cover that up by dictating to everyone else what they need to do. You don't want to be that person because that takes you out of your engagement. Emily, I want to throw this to you. Have you ever worked with people who are disengaged, but you've seen maybe a boss try to come in and fix the situation and just bungle it?
Oh, absolutely. And I think, like you said, that's sometimes the temptation or the go-to to try to get the group back on track and to get that disengaged person to become engaged. But I think a lot of times that just backfires. And you know, instead there are many more effective ways to, you know, get engagement out of that person versus just micromanaging. I think a lot of times that backfires completely.
Right. Are there any other methods that that you think have been helpful for disengaged people that you've seen in the workplace that I haven't thought of?
Oof. Let me think. You're
Just
putting
for
me on the
reference.
spot. I know. I mean, I no, I think you're doing an excellent job in covering the main ones. Nothing that I can think of at the moment, but I will think about it as you keep going.
Yeah, that's all right. We're actually down to 1 minute left, so I am going to have
Yes.
to stop soon. So action planning and ingredients to help for disengaged employees. Just I'm going to run through this real fast. Make sure they're clear on their purpose. Make sure they're clear on their time frame. Make sure they know who's going to stand with them on this. Make sure that they know what method they're going to do, and make sure they have the steps. If they do need more resources, make sure they know what's available. Make sure they know what their time commitment's going to be. If there are any difficulties that the two of you have anticipated, make sure they know what they are and what they can do if they run into something that was not expected, and what sort of outside help is available for them. Answer all of these questions with somebody who's disengaged, and I think you're going to find they're more engaged than when they started.
Absolutely. And yeah, like Phil mentioned, we're about out of time, but we actually, this was much better, Phil. If you'd like to learn more about time management, definitely attend the time management session at 4:30. But Phil and I did our best here to cover a lot of the main components that we want to keep in mind when working in a group. And hopefully you can walk away today with some helpful tips and strategies that you can use whenever you find yourself working in a group, both in school or outside of school or in your workplace or in your future career. But in the chat, I did post the links, the direct links to the next couple sessions that you can choose from at 4:30. So we got organizational skills at 4:30. We have communication skills and how to deliver a presentation. And then, like I said, also time management at 4:30. So those are all in the chat for you to click on for your next session. But thank you so much for attending today. I know it was a lot of information. Everyone did great with asking questions and following along and participating in the chat. We appreciate it. And have a good rest of your day with the conference. And hopefully we will see you in the ILC again soon.
Yeah. Everyone, thank you for coming by. Hope you enjoyed our presentation. And Emily, definitely, we did a good job on this one. We're over by 1 minute rather than 20.
That's
So
good for us.
This is an
very
improvement.
good for us. Yes.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
You've been an excellent audience, and we hope to see you again.
Absolutely. And whenever you are ready to head out to your next session, just click that red leave button and you are good to go.